After working for my father's business for 15 years, I finally managed to make it worth around $80 million. During a meal with the family, my dad looked my way and said, smiling broadly, "Your sibling will be taking over now." My spirits fell instantly, but I smiled back nonetheless. The following morning at the office marked a turning point for everything. I can still picture the way my dad smiled that night, his hand resting comfortably on my brother David's shoulder, as if his mind had been made up well before he uttered the words that would alter everything. "Your sibling will be taking over now." I felt a sickening sensation in my gut, but years of practice allowed me to keep my expression neutral. I gave a return smile as if his words hadn't gone right through me, as if they weren't undoing 15 years of my professional efforts in an instant. The dining area echoed with the sound of silverware hitting plates and the low murmurs of conversations between our larger family circle and close business associates. This wasn't just a regular family dinner. It was a celebration of sorts, a moment meant to acknowledge all that we had built, all that I had built. My father had started Weston Logistics when I was just a kid, a small-scale freight operation that struggled to stay afloat in its initial years. I grew up seeing him work hard to keep it running, putting in long hours late at night, skipping family trips, constantly chasing one more contract just to get by. When I was 26, having just finished business school, he eventually allowed me to come aboard, though I had to really push for that chance. And I hadn't simply joined the team. I had transformed Weston Logistics from a struggling regional freight company into a major national player, expanding operations across the country, securing deals worth millions, bringing in the latest technology. What used to be a small, almost failing company now stood out as a leader in the field, valued at $80 million. And yet, at this moment, none of that seemed to matter. My father had reached his conclusion. My brother David would be assuming control, not me. A quiet wave of agreement moved around the table, with whispers of praise directed at David. I watched as he lowered his eyes, faking humility, though I knew his true nature. David had never genuinely cared about the business. He had spent the last decade jumping from one unsuccessful venture to another, never quite finding his footing. He wasn't interested in moving goods. He wasn't interested in running operations. But he was very interested in having authority. I had spent 15 years demonstrating my capabilities, building Weston Logistics from basically nothing, making every hard choice, every late-night plan, every contract negotiation. David had done none of it. And still here we were. Despite it all, I held back my feelings. I had learned a long time ago that in this family, showing vulnerability was seen as weakness. I reached for my drink, steadying my hand before raising it. "Smile, Clara, smile." To David, I announced, my voice calm and steady. The people present raised their glasses, unaware of the turmoil hidden behind my eyes. My mother looked my way from across the table, with a look I couldn't quite read, but I knew she understood. Unlike my father, she had always seen the effort I put in, but she wouldn't get involved. She never did. Then there was my father, beaming with that same unwavering confidence, completely oblivious that his choice had started a chain of events. David met my stare from the other side of the table, a slight smirk barely concealed at the edge of his mouth. That was the instant I realized. This wasn't just my father's decision. David had been waiting for this chance. He had positioned himself carefully, playing the part of the devoted child who had finally found his purpose. And my father, always one for tradition, saw no fault in his reasoning. A son should take over the empire. A daughter? Well, a daughter's contributions were always thought of as temporary, just a side note in history, no matter how hard she fought to prove otherwise. But what they didn't grasp, what neither of them had considered, was that I had spent 15 years not just building a company, but strengthening my position within it. And tomorrow morning, they would discover precisely what that meant. That night, I got almost no sleep. My mind went over every sacrifice I had made for Weston Logistics, the late evenings, the forgotten birthdays, the relationships that fell apart under the weight of my ambition. I had given everything for this company, and now they expected me to just step aside? They had completely underestimated me. By 2:30 a.m., I was in my study at home, my fingers flying across my keyboard. Every contract agreement, every piece of ownership, every top-level deal. I understood the company's inner workings better than anyone. David thought he was walking into an easy handover, that by the following week his name would be on the door to the corner office, his spot secured. What he didn't know was that while my father had been busy with public appearances and my brother had been busy pretending to learn the business, I had been securing something far more valuable: command. At exactly 8:30 a.m., I walked into Weston Logistics' main building, just as I had for the past 15 years. The same walls, the same shiny floors, the same low sound of activity as employees settled into their daily work. But today was different. Today, I wasn't walking into my office. I was walking into a fight. The reception area was unusually quiet, the kind of stillness that comes before something big happens. They knew. The rumors had already started circulating. The news of my father's announcement at dinner had spread incredibly fast. Employees looked at me with hesitant expressions, avoiding looking directly at me, unsure whose side they should be on. I didn't acknowledge them. I walked with confidence, my shoes clicking against the marble floor, my posture perfectly straight. Never let them see you unsettled. I went into my office, closing the door behind me. I had exactly 15 minutes before my father and David arrived, thinking they would step into their new roles as CEO and future leader. 15 minutes before everything they had planned fell apart right in front of them. I sat at my desk, breathing in deeply, then turned on my computer. The screen showed a list of private documents and agreements, ones they had never thought to examine, ones they had assumed were unimportant. I brought up my ownership records. My hands paused over the keyboard for a moment before I clicked on the file titled Executive Ownership Agreement. And then I waited. At precisely 8:55 a.m., there was a sharp rap at my door. I didn't bother to reply. The door swung open, and in walked my father and David, both showing extreme confidence, his natural, David's carefully put on. My father strode in like a ruler surveying his domain, while David, wearing an expensive dark suit, gave me a smug, victorious smile. It took every ounce of my control not to burst out laughing. "Clara," my father stated in his usual commanding voice, as if he were doing me a kindness by speaking to me. "I assume you are aware of the transfer taking place today?" "Transfer?" Interesting choice of phrase. "I am aware," I replied calmly, leaning back in my chair. I glanced at David, whose smirk just grew wider. "Good," my father continued, nodding as if we were all in agreement. "David will be stepping in as the new CEO. We'll need you to assist with the handover, help him become familiar with the operations before you officially move on." I raised an eyebrow. "Move on?" I repeated, pretending to be confused. "Dad, I believe you are mistaken about something." His face tightened slightly in annoyance. He was used to my obedience, my willingness to quietly follow instructions. He was not prepared for this response. "Clara," he said, his voice strained, as if speaking to a small child, "this matter is not open for discussion. We have already reached a conclusion." I smiled then, a slow, knowing smile. "Oh, I know, Dad," I said softly. "The thing is, you do not have the authority to make that particular decision." David let out a quiet scoff, shaking his head. "Clara, don't make this harder than it needs to be. We are attempting to handle this the simple way." I did not respond. Instead, I reached for the remote and pressed a button. The large screen on my office wall lit up, showing a document. The very same one I had been looking at earlier, Executive Ownership Agreement. Signed August 10, 2014. Signatories: Clara Weston, Robert Weston, father, David Weston. My father's face lost some color. I turned to David. "Do you even know what this document is?" He folded his arms across his chest, shifting uncomfortably. "Some kind of ownership agreement," he guessed. I nodded. "Yes. And do you know what it states?" I pointed at the screen, highlighting a crucial section. This document was created when Weston Logistics was reorganizing its structure. It clearly states that any change in top leadership power, such as appointing a new CEO, requires the consent of all main owners. I met my father's eyes. "And I, Dad, possess 62% of the company's ownership." The silence that followed felt thick and heavy. My father's expression became harder. "That is impossible," David mumbled, stepping forward to look at the document more closely. Actually, it is very possible, I said smoothly. You see, over the years, while you were busy failing at every new business you tried, and Dad was busy acting the part of the company head, I was doing something else entirely. I leaned forward. I was securing my position. I turned back to my father. Remember when you needed money for growth in 2016? You signed over an extra 10% of your ownership to me in return for my investment. And in 2018, when we had that legal dispute, another 12% was put under my name as a guarantee, which you never bothered to reclaim. That plus my initial 40% makes me the main owner. My father's jaw tightened visibly. But David was starting to panic. You must be lying, he practically shouted. I took out a second document. This is the most recent official record filed with the government. Would you like to check it yourself? David snatched the paper and scanned it quickly, his face losing color with every passing moment. You can't actually do this, he stammered. Dad, tell her she doesn't have the right to do this. My father remained completely silent, because he knew I had legally outmaneuvered him, and there was absolutely nothing he could do about it at this point. I let out a slow breath, standing up fully. I am not dismissing you, David, I said. I would not want to force you into the actual job market out there. But you will report directly to me, and you will work under my leadership. Otherwise, I motioned towards the exit. You are welcome to depart. David turned to my father, his eyes pleading desperately, but for the very first time in his life, my father had no response, no way to resolve this situation. Because this was not his company anymore. It was mine. The quietness in my office was overwhelming. David still gripped the legal paper in his hand, his knuckles white from holding it too tightly. My father stood stiffly beside him, his expression impossible to read, but I knew what he was doing. He was calculating, trying desperately to find a way out of this predicament. There was none available. I had spent years getting ready for this exact moment, not because I had expected dishonesty, but because experience had taught me never to assume loyalty where power was involved. For the first time in my life, my father looked at me as if he did not recognize the person standing before him. Perhaps he never truly had before. So that's the end of it? David finally spoke, his voice filled with bitter resentment. You are simply taking everything for yourself? I let out a soft, mirthless chuckle. Taking everything? I repeated back to him, taking a step closer. David, I built this entire company from practically nothing. Every single contract, every expansion, every new idea. I made it all happen. While you were busy failing upwards repeatedly, I was keeping this business functional and alive. So no, I am not taking anything away. I leaned in just slightly. I am merely keeping what rightfully belongs to me already. David's face twisted with anger, but he had no counter-argument to offer. He knew that I was correct, and even worse for him, so did my father. He had spent years believing that family connection mattered more than actual capability, that his son would inherit what was rightfully mine to begin with. He had completely underestimated me, and now he was experiencing the consequences of that critical mistake. My father was the one who finally broke the extended silence. You are making a serious error in judgment, Clara. His voice was calm and measured, but I could clearly hear the tension underlying his tone. A family unit should stick together always. Do you really wish to destroy this relationship completely? I met his gaze head-on without flinching. Dad, I said slowly and deliberately, you destroyed this relationship the moment you reached your decision, without involving me at all. His lips pressed together into a thin, tight line. Business matters are larger than just one individual person. We can surely find a resolution that works out well for everyone involved. I tilted my head just slightly, pretending to give it serious consideration. Oh, I definitely agree with that point. That is precisely why I am offering both of you a clear choice right now. I turned to David first directly. You have the option to remain within the company, I stated, keeping my voice smooth and strictly professional, but you will not be holding the position of CEO. You will instead take on an advisory capacity role with significantly limited authority moving forward. Your income will be quite generous, but you will answer directly to me in all matters. David noticeably stiffened at my words. Alternatively, I continued calmly, You have the option to simply walk away entirely. I will purchase your shares of ownership from you at their current market value. You can take that substantial amount of money and find a brand new project to dedicate your energy towards." My father scoffed dismissively. "You are behaving as if you currently possess every single advantage." I simply smiled back. "I do indeed." A heavy, drawn-out silence followed my firm statement. I allowed them both to remain submerged in it, letting them experience firsthand what it truly felt like to be completely without any power or control. Finally, my father exhaled slowly, shaking his head slightly as if in utter disbelief at the situation. "I honestly never believed you were capable of doing this," he muttered quietly to himself. "Not this kind of thing to your very own family." I felt a sharp, sudden ache inside me at his words. "Not to your own family." I wanted desperately to explain to him that he was the one who had initiated this, that he had made the conscious decision to push me aside so carelessly, to act as if my contributions were merely temporary and insignificant. But I didn't say anything aloud. Because in the final analysis, it didn't truly matter what he thought or felt. What mattered most was that I was absolutely not going to allow them to take away what I had worked so incredibly hard to build from the ground up. Not at this moment, and certainly not ever in the future. David was the first one to storm angrily out of the room. Good riddance to him. I knew my brother well enough to accurately predict exactly what his next step would be. He would undoubtedly go directly to our various relatives, our numerous family acquaintances, portraying himself dramatically as the helpless victim of corporate treachery and betrayal. I honestly did not care one bit about that. I was not standing here in this moment to win their personal approval or sympathy. I was standing here to secure and win my own future destiny. My father lingered for just a moment longer, as if he was silently waiting for me to suddenly change my mind about everything. When it became clear that I was not going to do so, he gave a slow, deliberate nod of his head. "You have undergone a significant change," he stated quietly, his voice low. I met his gaze directly and evenly. "No, Dad," I replied softly but firmly. "I have simply and finally stopped pretending to be someone I am not." Then he also left the office. I exhaled deeply, sinking back down into the comfort of my chair. I logically should have been feeling completely triumphant and victorious at this moment. I had fought tooth and nail for my rightful place, and against all odds, I had clearly won the battle. But as I sat there staring out at the now empty doorway, I felt something else entirely as well. A quiet, persistent, and lingering ache deep inside my chest. A significant part of me had always, perhaps foolishly, wanted my father's true approval more than anything else in the world. Some small, desperately hopeful part of me had genuinely thought that if I just worked hard enough consistently, if I simply proved myself capable over and over and over again without fail, he would eventually truly see me for who I was and what I had accomplished. But the honest and painful truth was, he had never genuinely looked at me in that way before now. And at this moment, at this precise moment, he had absolutely no other choice but to finally see me for exactly what I truly was. Not merely his daughter. Not simply his temporary stand-in while waiting for someone else. But the undeniable and true leader of Weston Logistics. I turned my attention back to my computer screen, my focus immediately shifting to the tasks at hand. I had spent 15 incredibly hard years building this company from its foundations. Now, I would commit to spending the next 15 years ensuring that it became absolutely untouchable by anyone or anything. My father and my brother had actively attempted to take everything that belonged to me, but in the final calculation, they were the ones who ended up losing absolutely everything important to them. For the very first time in 15 long years, my office felt strangely and completely empty of their presence. No routine phone calls coming in from my father. No passive-aggressive or demanding emails arriving from David. Just the profound and unwavering silence filling the space. But that silence did not signify peace or resolution to me. It meant that the true battle, the ongoing struggle for continued power and control, had only just truly commenced right at this very moment. I knew deeply within my soul that my father wouldn't walk away quietly, and Brendan, he would put up a fierce struggle to get back what he believed was rightfully his. I wasn't silly enough to think this was finished. It had just begun. By the next morning, I could already sense the unease spreading through the workplace. Staff who had been friendly and confident with me just last week now seemed hesitant, as if afraid to take a stance. A few leaders of different departments avoided meeting my gaze. I understood exactly what was happening. My father, Mr. Evans, and Brendan were working the rumor mill. Old friends of the family, people on the board, top managers. They were planting seeds of doubt, portraying me as cold, uncaring, and disloyal. Brendan, especially, had taken on the role of the hurt son, betrayed by his own sister. I could picture him now, sitting in some fancy eatery, fake sadness in his voice as he told our investors how I had swiped the company right out from under him. And my father? He wouldn't need to say much at all. Just a deep sigh, a slow shake of the head, the carefully chosen words. I simply wish the best for my kids, always. It was a calculated and dangerous move, because if they managed to turn the people on my board and my senior managers against me, they could force me out of the very company I ran, or at least make it impossible for me to lead effectively. I was not going to let that happen. That afternoon, I called an urgent meeting with the top executives. As I walked into the conference room, I could feel the tension hanging in the air. Half of the room avoided looking at me. The other half watched me too closely, waiting for me to mess up. I took my place at the head of the table, my spot. "Let's not waste time," I said, my voice steady. "I know there have been private talks, discussions over meals, whispered conversations." I let my eyes sweep across the room, pausing on each person just long enough to make them shift uncomfortably. "I also know that some of you are wondering if my leadership here can last." A few people stiffened. No one spoke. I tapped my fingers lightly against the smooth wooden table. "Let's clear that up right now." I brought up a presentation on the screen behind me. Figures, data, facts. I built this company from a struggling local business into an $80 million industry leader over the last 6 years. Under my direction, we've seen a 320% jump in income and expanded into 7 new markets. I turned to the head of finances. "Mr. Jenkins, do we have even one financial sign showing this company is in trouble with me in charge?" Mr. Jenkins hesitated, then shook his head. "No. In fact, predictions show another 25% growth in the upcoming quarter." I nodded. "So let's be honest about what's really going on here." I leaned forward. "My father and brother aren't upset because the company is having a hard time. They aren't upset because I'm failing as a leader. They're upset because they expected me to step aside and let Brendan take over, regardless of whether he was qualified, regardless of the results." The room was completely quiet. Then I dropped the truly shocking news. "I also know that some of you have been contacted in the last day, offered things to try and get me to resign." I tilted my head slightly. "If anyone here would like to share those conversations now, this is your opportunity." A few people shifted awkwardly. Then, after a long quiet spell, one of the senior managers cleared his throat. I got a phone call," he admitted. "From your father. He mentioned he was thinking about making an official request to the board." I nodded, not surprised. "And did he offer anything in return for your support?" A pause, then a slow nod. "There it is." I breathed out, standing up. "My father started this company," I said. "I won't deny that. But I took it further than he ever could have, and I will not let him control it from the outside." I let my voice soften slightly. Controlled, dangerous. "If he wants a confrontation, he'll get one." I gathered my papers, looking each manager in the eye. "If anyone here thinks my father and brother should be in charge, now is the time to make your move." Silence. No one moved a muscle. "Good." I turned and walked out, my head held high. This wasn't just about keeping my business. This was about making certain they never thought they could take it from me again. That night, I made a call of my own. Not to someone on the board, not to an investor, but to the news reporters. "I have something for you," I said, "but you'll need to act quickly." About an hour later, I sent over files, messages, financial records, internal reports, proof that Evans and Sons, during the time my father was in charge, had been involved in some shady deals over the years, ones I had been working quietly for the last 11 years to sort out those problems. The story broke within 24 hours. Inside Evans and Sons, a past full of hidden bills and money cover-ups. The article was harsh. It praised my leadership for fixing the company's money situation. It criticized my father's poor management from the past. And most importantly, it proved that I was the sole reason Evans and Sons had survived. And just like that, the story people were hearing changed. The board stopped having doubts about me. The investors stopped hesitating. And my father? He had nowhere left to hide. Around 3 days later, my dad finally called me. I let the phone ring 3 times before answering. "Lisa," he said, his voice tight. "We need to talk." I leaned back in my chair. "Do we really?" Silence. Then finally a sigh. "You didn't have to do that." I let out a small laugh. "Neither did you. This company was meant to be a lasting legacy," he said. "For the family. For both of you." I felt a familiar ache. A small, foolish part of me had once wanted that too. But not anymore. "Dad," I said quietly, "if you wanted me to protect the legacy, you should have trusted me with it. Instead, you tried to grab it from me." Another long period of quiet. Then he asked, sounding almost unwilling, "What happens now?" I exhaled slowly. Now I made sure they could never lay a finger on my company again. The conflict was over. My father had lost. Brendan had vanished. And I had won. But as I sat in my office, looking out over the city skyline, I felt no happiness, no sense of victory. Just an empty feeling. I had spent over 10 years fighting for Evans and Sons, building it up, protecting it, making it stronger than it had ever been before. And yet, the cost of that win felt heavier than I had expected. Because while I had secured my place, I had lost something else along the way. My family. The next day, I walked into the office as if nothing different had happened. But everyone knew the truth. The quiet talks had stopped. The uncertainty had faded away. I was no longer just Lisa Evans, the boss. I was Lisa Evans, the woman who had outsmarted her father and brother and ended up on top. Some respected me for it. Some were scared of me because of it. And some still waited for me to fail. I let them keep waiting. At noon, my father and I met in the meeting room for what would be our last discussion. He looked tired, older, as if the weight of everything that had occurred had finally settled onto his shoulders. I waited for him to speak first. When he finally did, his voice was softer than I had ever heard it. "I'm stepping down," he said simply. Right away. I didn't show any reaction. I had expected this. "I'll sell the shares I still own," he continued. "I'll keep a tiny percentage as someone who invested, but I won't be involved anymore." I studied him carefully. "And Brendan?" His jaw tightened. "He's gone," my father admitted. "Took the payout offered. He won't be returning." A part of me had known this was how it would end. Brendan had never been strong enough to fight his own battles. Once it was clear he had lost, he had done what he always did, run away. Still, hearing it said out loud made something inside me ache. Not regret, not guilt. Just the finality of it all. I nodded. Understood. My father exhaled, rubbing his temple as if he had a headache. Then, after a long quiet spell, he said something I never expected. "I didn't think you were capable." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing I would ever receive. And strangely, I found that I didn't need it anymore. About a month later, Evans and Sons looked totally different from how it had before. The old board members who had sided with my father and Brendan? Removed. The executives who had questioned my leadership? Replaced. The company had always been strong while I was guiding it, but now it truly belonged to me. And with that control came a new idea for the future. I brought in plans my father had always turned down, updated systems he had called pointless, expanded into areas he had been too cautious to explore. Within 8 months, earnings skyrocketed. Within 2 years, we had gone past the $110 million mark. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just fighting to prove myself worthy. I was fighting to build something so strong that no one could ever take it from me again. Around 2 years after everything had happened, I met my father for dinner. It was the first time we had spoken since he had retired. He looked different, more subdued. He wasn't angry anymore, just accepting. "I read about the latest deal you finished," he said over his drink. "That was a smart decision." I smirked slightly. "I know." A faint smile touched his lips. There was no longer any strain between us. No more conflict left to fight. Only the simple, undeniable truth. He had tried to push me aside, and I had proved him completely wrong. To Evans and Sons, he said. This time, when I touched my glass against his, I didn't feel anger or resentment. Only peace, because I had already won and I no longer needed his approval to know it. As I sit in my office today, looking out over the city that I built my success in, I think about the lessons this journey has taught me. That family can be your biggest opponent. That loyalty is something you earn, not a guarantee. That power is never given, it's seized. But most importantly, that sometimes the best way to show your worth is to stop needing others to approve of you and build something so powerful that they can never ignore you again. I have no regrets. Evans and Sons is mine now, and I plan to make sure no one ever forgets it.